All right, you know it. It's Thursday. That means it's time for Taking the News from the left, right, and middle. From the left, we have Arise News contributor Wallace Ford. He is a political blogger and professor at Medgar Evers College. And from the right, we have Horace Cooper. He's a legal commentator and fellow with the National Center for Policy. Hello, this evening.
Good evening.
Gentlemen, good to see you.
How are you guys?
Hey, all right, okay. So listen, we have a full plate here, so let's just jump right in and take a first big bite. So the first big topic, of course, was one of the top stories in the show tonight, and that is the criticism coming from the right of President Obama refusing to categorize what he calls violent extremists as Islamic radicals. So let me just ask this question of you, and I think I'm going to start with you, Horace, and that is it even important? Is this a silly debate about semantics, and how could it help even if he changed the terminology?
Well, the semantics issue is the thing that is bringing attention to the policy issue. The real issue is that the president has been hesitating in terms of his commitment to resolve this conflict in a way that could be much more decisive. The problem, as the American people are saying in surveys across the nation, is that they do not believe that he is serious and committed. And so when he uses the language that he does, it reminds people of that very problem.
Okay. I've just got a couple of numbers for you, Horace, in this discussion. One is 1 billion. That would be over 1 billion Muslims that live here on this planet right now. It is not probably a good idea to pick a fight with all of them strategically, I would think, as well as just commonsensically. But so I start with that, but also a couple of other numbers. That would be 2008 and 2012. Those are the years when the American people decided that President Obama was the best choice against Republican and Republican candidates across the board, including his commitment with respect to dealing with issues of terrorism. Now, to the point, the major point, though, is that using this term Islamic terrorists as opposed to extreme terrorists, it might be a silly concern, as Debbie mentioned, but I think it's important to note that trying to link these outfits like ISIS and Al Qaeda to Islam is the same thing as the Nazis. Nazis were Christians, for goodness sake, and I don't think anybody would suggest that they were extreme Christians. They were obviously the terrorists of the worst type, the fascists of the worst type. Trying to mix these apples and oranges can only be a very, very difficult and unfortunately very dangerous thing to do in these days and times.
And didn't the president, Horace, make a very good point in his speech yesterday at this summit that these terrorists are not religious leaders, they're terrorists?
Okay.
And they kill Muslims.
First thing, let me say this. Wallace said we don't want to fight against 1 billion. I'll settle for fighting against 100,000. Refusing to even acknowledge the seriousness of ISIS as a threat, refusing to give our allies in the region,
do you really
the military.
Think that's true,
I'll let
Horace?
you finish, Wallace. I'll let you finish. Giving our allies in the region the weapons and the other material support that they've asked for is a problem. It is not good when our allies in the region decide they need to develop even more significant military forces so that we will have to manage what happens after they solve the problem on their terms.
Okay, well, this is sounding like it's coming out of, the new Rudy Giuliani playbook, which is like Barack Obama doesn't love America. And, the notion that, that Barack Obama is somehow not serious about ISIS and not serious. We might disagree with respect to the tactics and strategy, but I don't think that anybody would reasonably, including you, Horace, would reasonably suggest that the President of the United States somehow doesn't take ISIS seriously. That's not credible. And we're here to have a serious discussion. So let's talk seriously. You want to talk about strategy? You want to talk about tactics? Those are useful discussions. But to suggest somehow to impugn the president's concern with respect to ISIS, it's just very hard to have a conversation about that.
The American people are saying 2-1, this president is not taking the problem seriously enough.
Is that a Fox News
and it's
poll?
Also, no, it's not. It's a Gallup poll, but it's also an AP poll. It's also a Wall Street Journal poll, an NBC poll. Across the board, the American people are saying the very same thing that regional leaders in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, in Egypt are saying. We can't rely upon the American people to do the kinds of things that we've traditionally thought that they would do for us. We're going to have to do it. And we can't always trust that they will do it in the terms that we can be happy
All right,
about.
Horace, I'm going to
to
turn the page and go to our next topic, but I think that probably even you would have to admit that the president using that terminology is not going to change people's opinions about how seriously he takes
let me just
the threat
add one
on
thing
terror.
real quickly, Debbie, which is one of the things that are these allies and so-called allies that we're speaking about, what they really want is, of course, American boots on the ground. Okay, and President Obama has been very clear about not wanting to send my son or your children to go in these quagmires, the types of quagmires that, of course, the Bush-Cheney administration got this country into some, in the past decade. So we have to be real careful about saying that, well, we're not doing what Egypt wants us to do. We're not doing what Saudi Arabia wants us to do. What they want to do is to have U.S. troops, U.S. soldiers in place, taking the heat and taking the bullets in these regional conflicts.
So while we're in the vein of talking about foreign policy, and that's exactly what that is, I will turn the page and go to our next topic, and that is, of course, Jeb Bush is now making speeches and trying to distance himself from the foreign policies of his father and his brother when they were in the administration. Wallace, I'm going to start with you. How far can he really get?
Well, he's going to change his name, I understand. So that's one start, and that may help. But here's the thing. Jeb Bush obviously doesn't have a lot of foreign policy credentials, but what we know is that if he's going to try and get the Republican, or I call the T-Publican, nomination for the President of the United States, he is going to have to adopt one of these testosterone-infused types of policies, which says that the United States has to show strength, show leadership, which ultimately translates into military action and bellicose words that are not necessarily going to help this country at any point in time. What we do know is that this is the same Jeb Bush that was in favor of the Stand Your Ground gun legislation that's in Florida. We do know that this is the Jeb Bush that interfered in the
Wallace, you need to run for the Senate. This is the longest filibuster I've seen you do.
Well, thank you very much. I'm trying to model myself after you, Horace.
Go ahead, Horace.
My hero.
First of all, Jeb Bush is going to be distinguishing himself from the policies of President Obama. And the red line that Jeb Bush will identify is a red line that this president has not been willing to identify. And that is, when our strategic interests are at stake, we threaten that we will threaten what we are capable of doing, and we won't pull things off the table.
But Horace, let me push back just a little bit, because you make a good point that Jeb Bush will certainly distinguish himself from the policies of the current Democratic president. However, in these speeches, he has been trying to distinguish himself from the policies of his brother and his father. And I want to ask from you, is that a mistake? And I'm thinking of the effort of Al Gore trying to distance himself from Bill Clinton, thinking that he would be a drag on his campaign for president, and that turned out to be a big mistake.
Well, the only analysis that I've seen that seems to carry any weight was a Slate piece arguing that he plans to act as a more knowledgeable person about the foreign leaders and about our treaties and other policies, to distinguish himself from what people said was a person who was less informed that they had said about George W. Bush. I don't know what we will see longer term. I imagine that we're going to see a policy that's a lot closer to George Herbert Walker Bush in terms of being willing to use force, but not necessarily engaging in the nation building. That's the distinction.
Well, the Republican Party has been trying to distance themselves from George W. Bush, of course, ever since from 2007 onwards, trying to confuse Iraq and Saddam Hussein with the 9/11 disaster, of course, led to the quagmire in Iraq. It led to the quagmire in Afghanistan, led to the destabilization of the entire region, which was part of what we've just been talking about and will be continuing to talk about for a generation. So, I mean, Jeb Bush certainly is going to try to distance himself from his brother. His father, of course, is that's 2 decades ago, 25 years ago, and people may not remember what happened in Panama. People may not remember exactly how we got bamboozled into going into Iraq in the first place with trying to support the not very democratically selected monarchy in Kuwait. You see, so it's probably best that George Herbert Walker Bush kind of stay in the mists of history. And yeah, you can kind of say, well, yeah, I'm his son, but I'm not his brother. You know, it's going to be a neat trick. And I wonder what Mrs. Barbara Bush is going to say about all of that.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and we're going to have to bring it to a close right there, but it'll be interesting because if Jeb Bush gets the Republican nomination, Hillary Rodham Clinton gets the Democratic nomination, it's going to be fun to watch both of them try to distance themselves from their family members who held the office before them. We'll talk about that at another time. Horace Cooper, Wallace Ford, thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you again next week.
Bye, Horace.
Bye, Wallace.
Okay, now.
And you are watching Arise America.